Okay, we're ready.
All right, so we're set to go here. Um, so welcome to the January 20th, 2022 meeting of the CB6 Public Safety Committee. I'm Matt Roberts, I'm the chair of the Public Safety Committee for CB6, and this meeting is called to order at 6:33 p.m. Tonight we're joined by CB6 Assistant District Manager Brendan Berth. Members of the public, you can raise questions or comments that you have through the Q&A feature of Zoom, and then if there's time following the committee's discussion, we will field questions from the public. Minutes, Steve O has volunteered to take minutes once again tonight, so thank you, Steve. Other committee members, please take note that you should have received an email from the board office with a link to sign up for future meetings, and that link is being posted in the chat. And I will note here that the process for minutes will be modified pretty soon, so be on the lookout for an email from Kyle on that. So that brings us to the attendance, and Brendan will now call the roll.
Committee members, I will call your name and you will unmute yourselves. When your name is called, please say present. I will announce if there is quorum. Andrew Gross. Okay, I do not see Andrew. Matt Roberts.
Present.
Seema Shah. Do not see Seema. Sean Sherman. Okay, I do not see Sean at the moment. Steve O.
Here.
Stu Desser.
Present.
Eric Goldberg.
Present.
Lou Sapersky.
Yo.
And Ozzy Abadi. Okay, we have a quorum.
All right, thank you, Brendan. And so that brings us to the agenda. And tonight's agenda was distributed ahead of time by the board office and appears on the screen before you. Committee members, if there's no objection, we will adopt the agenda as stated. Members of the committee, if you object to adopting the agenda, you may raise your hand through Zoom. Seeing no objections, the agenda for tonight's meeting is adopted. Now, the minutes from the November 18th, 2021 committee meeting were distributed ahead of time by the board office. If there's no objection, we will adopt these minutes as drafted. If you object to adopting these minutes, you may raise your hand through Zoom. And seeing no objections, minutes from the November 18th, 2021 meeting are adopted and will be available on the CB6 website tomorrow. So now the ground rules here. In order to conduct an efficient meeting, let's observe a few ground rules. No one may speak until granted the floor. Committee members, if you have a question about committee business or wish to make a motion, please raise your hand through Zoom. As a reminder, the chat function should not be used for committee business or questions about agenda topics. All such remarks should be made on the record by raising your hand through Zoom. Chat should only be used to alert us to any technical difficulties you're having or to state in writing information like an email address that was already stated aloud on the record during the meeting. When a committee member is given the floor to speak, I will identify you. You can unmute yourself so you can speak. And please remember that we are required by New York State law to read a verbatim transcript of the meeting, so please keep your questions and comments succinct and remain in the discussion. Brings us to committee business here. So we're going to do a couple of things tonight. So agenda item number 1 still brings back the conversation from 2 months ago on proposed legislation for parole eligibility. And so there's 2 bills on that we will continue the discussion. I don't want to spend a lot of time on that, maybe 15, 20 minutes. The committee wanted to table the matter until January to think about it and potentially take a point of view on that. And then our big discussion tonight will focus on public safety, quality of life, human rights priorities for the new mayoral administration. And we have several guests to help us with those priorities, and I want to hear from the committee and members of the public as well. So I do understand we have some members of the public, so I look forward to hearing from all of you as well. So let's get to it. So we'll start with agenda item number 1 here, committee members. So we discussed at length these 2 bills in November, as minutes alluded to. Do you guys have any questions? I believe we have our presenters from last time on the call. If there's any questions, there's no need for them to present again, but committee members, do you have any questions or wish to make any motions on these matters? All right, so if I do not hear from any committee members on this matter, we will take no further action. Is that what the committee has suggested? So they talked about possibly doing a reso in support or in opposition or supporting certain aspects of the bills. But I'm not hearing any comments from the committee on this. So we will move you guys another 15 seconds. Stuart, you're in.
Well, I'd like to a reso in support of it, but I'd like to hear how other committee members feel.
Okay, so a motion has been made to write a resolution in support. Is there a second?
This is Eric. I would second.
Eric, okay, so the motion has been made and seconded. So this would be a straight resolution supporting the bills. So Brendan, want to conduct the vote?
Yes. When your name is called, please say whether you're in favor, opposed, abstain, or abstain for cause.
My apologies, Matt. Do you mind repeating what bills they are? I just came in late. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. So this would be the 2 bills which we discussed at length last month. I know you weren't able to make it, but these pertain to parole eligibility for incarcerated individuals. And text, I think the text is available online.
I can also put it in the chat just so that, or I can put the link to the bill.
I'm familiar. Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, great.
Thanks.
So I will, with the motion being made and seconded, I will call your names. And when I call your name, please say whether you are in favor, opposed, abstain, or abstain for cause. Matt Roberts.
I'm going to abstain.
Okay. Seema is not here. Sean is not here. Steve O.
In favor.
Stu Desser.
In favor.
Eric Goldberg.
In favor.
Lou Sapersky.
Abstain.
And Ozzy Abadi.
In favor.
Okay. With 4 in favor, nobody opposed, and 2 abstentions, the resolution passes. Now we need to have someone write the resolution.
Any volunteers to write the resolution?
I'll volunteer. This is to be presented when then?
This would be for the February full board. So it would be due, I guess, the week prior.
And since I'm not sure if you've written any resolutions before, Eric, I'll make sure that you have the resolution template.
Yeah, we'll help you with any questions. All right, so thank you everybody for your participation on that. And the resolution passed, and we'll move to the full board. So thank you all there. So we're going to move to agenda item number 2, which was our featured discussion tonight, which really is a very open conversation. We have several, as I mentioned at the open, several guest speakers, and we have some members of the public joining us. So let's start with the conversation. So what we're really looking to establish here is, what are the public safety, quality of life, human rights priorities for the new administration? So this can be, so there's several items that we can present. We can do a resolution, we can do multiple resolutions, or we can just have a conversation and perhaps guide us into future discussions. So without further ado, what I want to do is we have several members of the business improvement districts that represent portions of the district with us tonight. So what I want to do is let's start with some introductions, just so everybody is familiar with the organizations here and also who they represent. And so I guess, and then if you have any opening statements. So let's start with Rob, East Midtown, Rob Burns, East Midtown Partnership. See, Rob.
Thank you, Matt. Lou's got his passport card. I love it. First of all, no, I have no opening statement, certainly. Sure. And actually, I don't have a ton of complaints when it comes to public safety in the East Midtown area, but I'm not parochial enough to think that the city is all like it is on Lexington Avenue in the 50s. So I share concerns of many of my colleagues, especially those on the west side, where things have been very bad, about the quality of life in the city. Now, some of it gets overblown by the New York Post. I think we all know that. We all are in Manhattan all the time. We all, for the most part, feel very safe still. And we all appreciate the jobs that the police officers are doing out there, and that the administration, and even in the de Blasio administration too, have been doing. But that said, huge quality of life problems, and they are affecting the business community. They are affecting tourism. We need to, our concern is that without having the smash and grab problems that some other areas have, fortunately, and I'm not naive enough to think they could never happen in my area. They just have not yet. But the big concern is that we have no effective way of dealing with the problem of emotionally disturbed people out there right now. Everyone's hands off, and we have a big problem with chronic street homelessness. Most of those, I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush, but the statistics bear this out, that most of the chronic homeless have mental health problems or serious addiction problems, or both. And that is a concern, and it's hard to bring people off. But the fact is that when you basically take a hands-off approach, with the city largely has done, leaving it all in the hands of DHS, which of course is decimated like other agencies with COVID and other problems. We effectively have I had a woman on 58th Street the other day. She sat down basically in the doorway of a business and wouldn't leave, and said, this was her territory. It was her turf. She honestly was talking as if she owned it. You can't get a police response for that, but on the other hand, you're not going to get customers through the threshold of that business either. So we need that. To the extent I have a concern, that's it. I think we solve 2/3 of the problems of crime and perception of crime in public safety, if we can start dealing with the problems of emotionally disturbed people out there. I don't have the single answer either. It's obviously multi-agency thing. And I do hope the new administration is going to tackle this. I don't expect a lot in their first few weeks. Everyone's got to get their feet wet.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks, Rob. I think we have a question from the committee for you, Stuart.
Right. So the Housing and Homeless Committee had a meeting 2 days ago, and there were objections from the community that they did not want, or at least did not want, a disproportionate number of shelters in their area. Assuming that the city could address some of the issues that you just raised, would you object to having shelters in the East Midtown?
No. As a matter of fact, we embraced when the Vanderbilt Y was converted during COVID for use by the Bowery Residents Committee. We embraced that. We supported that. We understand that every community, I'm not going to say people are going to scream, but that's their prerogative. The fact is, though, our philosophy has always been, if you want a problem addressed, you have to share some of the burden of addressing it. And we would certainly embrace having shelters in the district. But shelters with services, let me make that clear. Not shelters that are dumping grounds, just to say you've got people off the streets or say you've given them a bed. Shelters that where there are professionals there that can help people deal with their problems and move forward.
So there's a model that you like that exists right now, is that right?
I think what happened at the Vanderbilt Y was great, frankly. BRC was there. They were very hands-on. I know there were complaints out there. I heard especially from the Dag Hammarskjöld people, that there was more loitering. There was more of a sense of a lack of safety that people had, and I appreciate that. And I hope, I'm not confident, but I would hope that BRC took that seriously. But otherwise, minimal complaints. But BRC went in there very openly. It wasn't a dumping ground like you had in the hotels on the West Side. BRC went in, they told the community what they were doing. There was no secret here. Council member Keith Powers had regular meetings for the first several months to allay any community concerns, and did all. I mean, admittedly, that's not in my district. It is 2 blocks out of my district, but it's not in my district. But the fact is, I got 2 calls over the first 6 months that the Vanderbilt Y was used as a shelter. I think that speaks well for what they had hundreds of men in there, and I think it speaks well for how it worked. I mean, I don't want to speak for CB6 because you probably got more complaints than I did, but it was small compared to what was happening in other areas of the city, certainly.
All right. Thanks, Rob. So let's do. So I think let's move around to the other bids, and then let's see where we have some common themes. I definitely sense quality of life is a key issue, and I have some suggestions, but I want to hear from everybody first. So let's move geographically to Grand Central Partnership, Rochelle. So welcome, and
Thank you.
good to have you with us.
Thanks for
Any
having me.
thoughts?
Well, very similar to what Rob just spoke of. We find in our district, our predominant problem, what we get most complaints about, is the people on the street that need social services. So we happen to engage a homeless outreach provider. We find it to be somewhat effective. When we were working with the recovery team under the de Blasio administration, the homeless services worked together with the PD, and we found that to be effective in dealing with encampments and the like. So we think really that there needs to be more funding for these outreach teams. You know, for us, you know, fiscal year to date, we've already been able to place 14 people into housing. And last fiscal year, we actually placed 38 people from our district into housing. So that's been really effective. And that's really our, I would say, by far the biggest complaint we get from our stakeholders.
All right, very good. So appreciate all the work there, coordinating with outreach. So that's a potential. So committee members flagged that as a potential ask here, as far as increased funding for outreach. Let's move to, I guess, the Flatiron District. James is with us, and just to note, I know that a lot of the bids cross over into CB5 as well. For the sake of this conversation, let's not worry so much about the geographic boundaries. The issues are pretty much the same across district lines. So, James, welcome, and any thoughts or anything you want to add to the conversation?
Thanks for inviting me. And yes, I'm James Metham. I'm the executive director of the Flatiron 23rd Street Partnership. Right, as Matt mentioned, we have a small piece of the district proper that's in CB6, but many of the concerns are similar. And we've just recently expanded our boundaries as well, from about 27th, 28th Street up to 31st Street. Park Avenue is primary. Park Avenue South is the line, but we have a spur that certainly takes into account 23rd Street and the Brew College campus. And again, similar in terms of homelessness, you know, and social services, similar things. It's chronic chronic homeless individuals that are out on the street, who unfortunately we're on a first name basis with. Those are the individuals that we work with the city and social service providers on, as well as our own homeless outreach crews from Urban Pathways. And you know, in terms of shelters, certainly over the past 2 years, and particularly, I think the neighborhood, CB5, 29th Street Association. I see there's a mention from Gail on 30th Street. There's certainly a feeling that the area north of 28th Street up to the 30s and the 40s has taken on its fair share, more than its fair share of social service, both beds and outlets. And there's been a big push to kind of push the city in reconsidering making either vacant hotel spaces or other vacated spaces future sites for this. And we share that concern. And, you know, we've had some very strong success stories similar to what Rob mentioned earlier on, whether it's the BRC, the St. George, the Harmonia of success stories when it comes to this. But we've also been very concerned about lack of communication from the city and the state on relocating individuals to hotels without very little notice. I know that's probably the same case for CB6, CB5 alike, when all of a sudden you're faced with placements like that. So, and then, you know, in terms of public safety, we've had our fair share of incidents, not as many smash and grabs of late that I know Madison Avenue, and I'm sure Ed will bring up too with around Union Square. But of course, you know, there's a mix of uses in the neighborhood. There's many nightclubs in Flatiron and Nomad on the border here. And there's been a couple of dangerous and violent incidents where the 13th precinct as well as Midtown South precinct have had to get involved. And, you know, a lot of the work that we're doing now with our public safety ambassadors and officers is also, you know, building a stronger relationship between precincts at the line, which is, you know, for the most part 29th Street in our district, and making sure that there's no unintentional passing of the buck from one precinct to the other. And just like we stem several, we're on 3 community boards, we have 3 council members, and we have 2 precincts. So, I think the work that we have in front of us as a bid that's newly expanded is trying to be that connective tissue, and talking with all of you in all of these various jurisdictions. So I'll leave it there, though.
All right, thanks, James. Any questions for James before we move to Ed? All right, so Ed, we'll move now south to the southern part of our district and the Union Square partnership. Welcome.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, CB6, for having me. Ed Janoff, the Deputy Director of Union Square Partnership, and our bid does extend as far east as First Avenue on 14th Street. And we have mostly the same issues that have been raised here, I think are pretty consistent in the center of Manhattan. The top ones being illegal vending. I didn't hear necessarily mentioned, continues to be, I mean, it's a little bit less when it's colder. This is a persistent problem around Union Square. Street homeless, mentally ill, and then also, there's increasing amplified sound we get a lot of complaints about. And that's just it's another kind of form of disorder that there's not a lot of difficulty dealing with through the city response, particularly when it's, whether it's in a park or on a street, the agency of jurisdiction can change. And then, of course, the smash and grab, which honestly, to some degree, is just more grab now, right? It's just a group of kids walk into a store and take stuff and walk out. And I think one of our longtime retailers, Rothman's, was featured in an article recently. They were hit twice, and it's upsetting for a lot of our small businesses. We've seen some of them, like the Dwayne Reed on 14th and 4th, decided to have a paid detail of police officers, and even that's been, necessarily not that strong a deterrent, and so they're really kind of frustrated with the petty crime. Luckily, most of it tends to be nonviolent. Probably the most violent place in Union Square right now is the subway, which we can't do a whole lot about. Even with the transit district police right there, that crime happens kind of quickly and unexpectedly. But on the street level, our operations team, our operations manager, and our operations director are out there every day, sort of documenting and coordinating responses for various issues. If it's street homeless, it's typically the Department of Homeless Services and the outreach provider. If it's something that's illegal, it might be PD, et cetera. A real hotspot in your district has been First Avenue and 14th Street, where we've seen homeless encampments, we've seen illegal vending that has kind of grown to the scale of even like a flea market, and sometimes probably the most difficult problem to address is the combination of encampment and vending. So that's where somebody kind of takes up residence in a space on the street and also sells things, their possessions from that space. And, we've had a success working particularly with the last administration's Commercial District Recovery Safety Plan Task Force. That I think helped a lot of the commercial areas get a response, a coordinated response from the multitude of city agencies that are necessary to address some of these particularly sensitive and humanitarian issues. Because when you've got somebody living there, you need the services that they need. You need a way to collect and tag their belongings. You need enforcement if there becomes, some kind of illegal enforcement issue. Way more than we can do with a 311 report, right? And we don't have any kind of, we don't have our own resources or authority to do anything like that. So I would say that task force was really helpful for us, particularly in addressing vending, which is one of these that just requires a multi-agency response. So again, similar issues to everybody else. We remain attentive to them. And finally, just one of the concerns we're seeing is as the pandemic wears on, we see more retail closures. I mean, the retail will not be able to survive forever. We were really encouraged to see our foot traffic when the holiday market was open was actually above 2019 levels, briefly. But we're back down with Omicron hitting to maybe 2/3. And not only is it difficult to watch retailers have to close up shop and close the business and lose the jobs, but then you have a vacant storefront, which means that's an area that's not being watched. It's not being cleaned as well. It becomes a much bigger burden for us. We're already expecting to have to increase our sanitation staff next year to respond to, dumping, graffiti, et cetera. And so we really are concerned about trying to protect retail, not just for the livelihoods of the shopkeepers, but it becomes a domino effect on the rest of the street. So I'll leave it at that and happy to answer any questions.
All right. Thanks, Ed. There's, a lot of material there. So, all right, let's turn this into more of a discussion now. So if I were to ask both members of the bids and our committee simultaneously, what would be the top recommendations that you would suggest that we should be asking for to solve the problems that we've been discussing for the last 10-15 minutes or so? And just feel free to raise your hand through Zoom if you have anything.
I can't remember how to, oh, there.
All right, Rob, go ahead.
More fun. I mean, look, nothing's going to happen overnight. We know this. This was the problems, especially with homelessness and emotionally disturbed people. It's been a long time. It's been brewing, and COVID set it all free. It threw out all the rules. But that said, we're getting very close, even though the council is just starting to settle in. We're getting very close to budget season again. Advocacy for a lot more money to DHS and to the support system that people will need to get the help they need. And also, the police were pretty much told to take their hands off the situation. And I get that. We did have a problem with over policing in the city. That said, though, there needs to be something coming out of City Hall that re-engages the police in situations where we have some serious conditions that affect all of us, the safety of all of us.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, I definitely think, funding for DHS and specific services within should be in our asks here. Another thing I want to throw out, which somewhat pertains to some of the conversations here, is as most of you know, I also serve as the president of the 17th Precinct Council, and one of the things we're seeing as far as DHS goes, and as far as it's semi-related to DHS and the shelter situation, and this came up after conversations about the you cited 161 Lexington, which we're not going to discuss in detail tonight. That meeting was 2 nights ago. But I think one of the things, in addition to the overpopulation of homeless shelters in parts of our district and whatnot, I think one of the key factors is security. And it came to light. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the women's shelter on 45th Street, and for the past year or so, they've had a different security provider. Previously, they had DHS security. DHS police was at that site. And the key with DHS police is they have arrest capabilities. So you take that out of the equation and replace them with a private security provider. Guess what? Now you've got the local precinct going over there multiple times a day, every time there's a dispute or an argument, whereas that previously could be handled in-house. So, one of the things I think we should ask for is DHS police to be reinstated or used in most shelters. I'm not going to say every shelter. I think Harmonia and CB5 operates very well as an example on their own. So I don't think it's necessary everywhere, but I think there should be a criteria that should require DHS police. So I'd be interested in thoughts on that. Obviously, it would cost more, but it would certainly solve a lot of safety issues in-house in some of our facilities.
Matt, I can just say that I heard the same issue and request from the BRC facility on 25th on over on the other side of 6th Avenue. Similar issue and request for returning to DHS versus private.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know.
And
Alright,
that's in that area is on 6th Avenue, which is CB5 and CB4, problematic, particularly. And it's just, again, it's everything feels like triage when it comes to us working on this and trying to coordinate with various agencies. And it's just beyond just funding, it's also just coordination and somewhat of a mandate from our electeds and the new administration on who is tasked with working together or individually on, especially with emotionally disturbed individuals, mentally ill. It's just, it's unfortunately it's fallen on communities and bids in many regards to kind of just gather the troops to try to deal with these on one-off basis. And unfortunately we're back having these discussions again and again because it's not holistic.
Yeah, and you see that in pretty much all of the even in our community meetings with a lot of the shelter sites, especially the DHS HRA run 30th Street Men's Shelter, which of course falls in CB6, and what you see there is there's so many different cooks in the kitchen. It's hard to figure out who's in charge of what in the overall overall shelter system and homelessness in general. So you got outreach providers, you have multiple layers of city government, different agencies. So I think there's definitely an opportunity to reorganize the structure there. So I would say, I've been long asking for an org chart of DHS, and nobody's been able to produce one. I think there's obvious reasons for that, but so I certainly would be on board with, I think we got to look at the whole picture and the landscape and the reporting structure and who's in charge of what. I think is a huge undertaking, but hopefully it's something that this administration can tackle. Other thoughts?
I just want to quickly piggyback on James. Sorry to talk you far too much tonight.
Oh, it's quite all right.
One thing, as he said, people are looking to the bids to clean up a lot of the mess, and our people know the streets, and that's great. But we're not peace officers. We have licensed security officers out there, but in many cases, minimally. In my case, the most I have in any given day, if I'm lucky, is 6 to cover 48 blocks of Midtown Manhattan. So we are not the police. We can't do what the police do. We don't enforce. We'll call 911 or 311 as appropriate, but we don't have any special powers there. And so the fact that a bid exists is great, but it is not a panacea. It doesn't clean up the problem, and we can't clean up the problem.
All right. Unfortunately, a lot of the city's negligence and just ultimately falls to the bids. So I think that's a concern overall. So I want to turn to an op-ed that appeared in the Daily News. And Brendan, if you can put that on the screen. I think I know the Grand Central Partnership was part of that, and some of the other bids outside of Midtown, and we circulated this to the committee. So there's a lot of things in here. So there's a lot of interesting things. So I'd want to know what the committee thinks about some of these ideas. Do we agree, disagree, have some other things to add? So in the last column, you see their 5-point plan, which I don't know if Rochelle, I believe your organization was part of this. So I don't know if you want to elaborate further, or if there was any there's anything else that should be pointed out in here. I'll give you guys a minute to read it if you're not familiar with it. And interestingly to note, number 3 here deals with foreign parole guidelines, and furthermore stop the state from releasing people directly to homeless shelters without a reentry plan. And I think that warrants some attention here, because a lot of what we're seeing with some of the mental health issues stems from that.
Yeah, and I think basically it's really saying that we need more social services to be made available.
Asia.
Sorry, my daughter's practicing piano, so hopefully you can hear me over that. I think the 5-point plan is a great starting point and some great recommendations. My question with regards to the stop the release to homeless shelters, are we offering alternatives, or is it just saying let's stop doing that? Are there any suggestions?
I guess that's so. I don't. Were you directing that to?
Just overall, I just was curious, Matt, because of the article, and I'm muting myself. I'm just curious if there's an alternative, like a halfway home, like something that provides services and allows a gradual reentry, supporting more of those programs.
Sorry, here I go again.
Oh, go ahead.
The idea, these are simple points. And by the way, your daughter sounds great, Asia. But
I'm going to shut the door though, because I think it's cutting off my audio. I'll be right back. So.
My father used to sell pianos, and I did not inherit that talent. But the idea was these are talking points. There are a lot of nuances with each one of these. This was to hit hard, boom, boom, boom. Here are our suggestions as people on the streets that see this day by day. Yes, that's every one of these is oversimplified in a sense. But 3 is definitely, have a plan. Let's not just don't warehouse people. First, don't just send people back out on the streets without knowing what we're doing here. Mm-hmm. Again, it's nothing we're going to fix overnight, but that's the concept here. Have a plan. Think about it. Have multiple steps, but don't let us not keep experiencing what we are today.
And Rob and Rochelle, correct me if I'm wrong, because I know your organizations, more like formally Midtown organizations, worked with CB5 in recent weeks too for a letter, I believe, right, based on some of these points. And I did see that letter, and I think it was really, the tone and the wording was very, I thought it was very well done. And that I think it ended up being 4 points, maybe rather than 5, but similar to these 4. Yeah. But I thought that was pretty good, and maybe that's something that could be shared with CB4 to base off that, similar to this article.
Or 6. Yeah. No, well.
Or 6. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, I know. Well, if you haven't seen the letter, I will send myself a note right now to send it to you. I'll send it to Brendan, and he can distribute it to the committee. Sure. But yeah, the CB5 basically was an endorsement of these points, recognizing there's nuance here.
Yeah. Stuart, question, comment?
Yeah, I'd just like to know what the perspective is on item 4 on the bail reform bill. What do you want to see changed, and what evidence do you have that it's a problem the way it stands right now?
All right. Does anyone want to take that? I can comment briefly on that. From my perspective, it's very difficult to quantify, even working with high-ranking members of the police department, to really quantify, how much crime is committed based off of people not being held on bail. But there's certainly anecdotal evidence It shows there's, a one-off incident here, one-off incident there, where a crime or a tragedy could have been prevented. So I don't know if any of the bids have any other perspectives on that, but from my chair, I mean, I think there's an opportunity to look at it. I'm not saying we need to go back to where we were, but I mean, it's very difficult to quantify the true impact, and I think that's what members of the state legislature were looking for, and it's just very difficult to, because of the way statistics are kept. It's very difficult to come up with a holistic perspective there.
I'll just express that item concerns me. I'm comfortable with everything else that's said here.
I think some of it goes back to what the bids always say about everything. We aren't always a one size fits all. And with bail reform taking a lot of judicial discretion out of the equation, we felt that should be looked at again. We are not arguing that people that there's an over incarceration problem. We just feel that there should be more judicial discretion here.
All right. So I think we can work separately on any commentary as far as bail reform goes. I know there's a lot of data being compiled because 2021 was certainly a period in time that we're looking at. Obviously, it stems back to 2020. We had the pandemic in there, so I think we need to look at some of the data that just came in on that. But we can certainly come back to bail reform. But I don't disagree that it's something that may warrant a second look. I don't know how members of the committee feel, but I would steer this conversation towards some of the other asks, because the item that we put on the agenda was really establishing priorities for the new administration, mostly here at the city level, but the bail reform would be obviously at the state level. So anything else, committee members? Questions, concerns, any points of action? Steve?
A question for the bids. Are you familiar of the number of HRA and private social service locations in your district? And are you also informed ahead of time when and if the social service location comes online or goes offline? How is the communication there? So it's a two-part. Are you aware of the number of social service locations, and how well do they communicate with you?
All right. Anyone want to take that?
Yes, I'm aware. No, we are not consulted. So, but we monitor. And again, like I said, accidentally muted myself. We welcome our share of the what I hope is eventually the solution to the problem.
Rochelle, did you have anything else?
Am I muted or not muted?
No, I hear you.
You hear me? Okay. Well, we just recently actually, spoke on behalf of New Providence, which is it's just about a block outside of our district, and we sometimes are notified, others not. We learn of things, but I wouldn't say there's any at all kind of formal process for it.
Mm-hmm. All right. Steve, did you have any follow-up? I mean, so from my standpoint, it's also, another ask could be creating a formal process where we need to.
Well, it's kind of pivoted from the other housing and homeless committee discussion, how they talked about, and you clued into it earlier,
Yep.
The number of the concentration in certain areas of social services. Obviously, it's important to address the chronic homeless situation that we have, the social need that's for the vulnerable. But the locals certainly feel, people who live here and work here certainly see the day-to-day, where certain areas seem to bear its heavier share than others. So that's kind of where I guess it leads to, could a lot of this be addressed by being more communicative? Could this be better addressed having a more open channel when someone on, like, for example, in DHS is more aware that the local presence feels that it's a little bit overburdened? Like the main drive is that it seems to be a gap in some type of communication, and that's kind of where I'm wondering if there is, like I said, a pattern across the different bids.
All right. Any other thoughts on that? I mean, I would say that all kind of ties into the bigger idea that, the whole structure and landscape needs to be reexamined, to the point where you have input from the bids where there are bids, and then you have other populated areas where there aren't any bids, which is a good chunk of our district as well. So I don't want to forget that, and put too much dependency on the bids. I mean, there's certainly a responsibility of the city to provide services here. So other comments, thoughts? We have about 20-25 minutes if we need it, but I just want to make sure that we come away with some direction. And if there's any members of the public, feel free to put your questions. Q&A feature. Stuart?
I have the feeling the numbers don't exist and probably can't exist, but if the bids could assemble some sense of what kind of economic impact the homeless, the homeless who need psychiatric care cost the districts, cost the bids, that would probably be helpful.
All right. Yeah, I'm not sure what we're going to be able to get there.
Yeah, hard number to track. Especially, look, where I am, people aren't still haven't come back to work, so I can't tell anything yet. We started to get a little better in December. When Omicron came along, we're down to 15% occupancy again. So
yeah, it's similar to correlate. That's difficult, no doubt, especially for chronic homelessness. So it's, yeah, I don't think we can promise something like that, but yeah, I mean, it's the balance of both perceived unsafety, safety issues with real problems with individuals that need service and attention and help, and the danger that they pose to themselves and others is unfortunately part of the narrative that you're seeing played out every day now, with sadly some really terrible consequences. But right, in terms of what we're seeing on the grounds, in terms of economics, in terms of leasing, we have some corridors that 20-30% of the storefronts are vacant. Things were ticking up again. Omicron really hurt, but I think we'd want to wait and see until the spring, and trying to support as many of them as possible to stay afloat in the meantime. But correlation is a tough one between, homelessness is emotionally disturbed individuals, mental illness, and economic impact. It's very tough.
Well, it would probably be almost impossible, but all the bids do survey people who live, work, or the businesses in the district, and perhaps a survey question um, might help with this.
I mean, for Union Square, we'll definitely, we'll do that. I mean, James, I think you guys are doing your annual community opinion survey right now, but we usually do ours in the summer, and so I think that might be a good time to ask a question about that. We've been doing a community opinion survey for probably 15 years, and last year we saw lower numbers on terms of rating of quality of life than we'd ever seen. You know, I'd say I think it was in the low 80s, so kind of like not rating us, but rating the district as sort of a B- on quality of life. And in particular, you know, we survey workers, we survey residents, we survey visitors, and residents in particular, we're rating the quality of life in the upper 70s. And so we are trying to figure out right now as a bid, you know, what else can we do with our limited resources and limited authority. And we are internally trying to put together a quality of life task force, and you know, really trying to see what numbers can we measure and what's in our toolkit. And so I think we'll definitely, you know, at the very least, make surveying and outreach and engagement a priority, so we can, you know, get whatever numbers we can to try to document the problem. Because I think what you're seeing here, like with this op-ed, you know, this is a pretty uncomfortable position for bids to be in. This is not our area of expertise. We were not criminal justice experts. We are not social service experts, right? You know, I can tell you what kind of paint should be, you know, go on a light pole, and what kind of, you know, flowers go. And this just, we do safety coordination, but the scale of this problem is really beyond us. But what we can do is observe and engage and communicate. And I think what you're seeing here is some of our colleagues, you know, particularly ones that maybe, you know, have more resources or more experience, expressing what they think could be some possible large-scale solutions. But what's important to me, and what I see in this document, is, you know, observations, statistics, and anecdotes. So really duly noted. We'll see what else we can do to try to, you know, try to enumerate the observations and the complaints that we hear.
Thanks, Ed. Yeah, I mean, it's so I think we understand the problems at this point. I think we've covered a lot of territory here. So in terms of asks, so committee members, let's focus for the next 10 minutes on, you know, what do we need to be asking for here. And it could be, I don't want to get overly complicated by, you know, making some massive, you know, turning this into a massive resolution, but we can certainly, you know, come up with, they can be, you know, quick resolutions, or they can be, you know, specific to one item. I think you lose consensus when you try to package too many things into resolutions. So, Steve?
Along with the lines of communications with, I know the bids have worked closely with the social services and the outreach teams. Is there any overlap in the needs of the social services to what's the bids usually needs for operations? For example, a lot of the social services shelters provide programs to get a lot of their clients to be re-engaged into society, to be re-engaged into employment, things of that nature. Has there been discussions like that, where it could be something that can benefit both the social services and the business districts in the area?
Does anyone want to take that one?
Is that something that
I mean,
makes sense?
I don't I don't know if I can speak for Union Square specifically, but there are models out there where, where bid services are coupled with workforce development programs. I can't say that this is an easy or one size fits all approach, but plenty of us bids have had contracts with groups like ACE and the Doe Fund, and they do often try to source workers from within the local community. That's not the same thing necessarily as street homeless or mentally ill or drug addicted, but anything that can anywhere where services that we provide can be coupled with opportunity for anybody who's in need is always something that I think all of bids are going to be open to.
I think, to piggyback on what Ed said, I believe the four of us all have independent contracts with homeless outreach service providers. So in our case, BRC, and you've heard from the others. We also utilize the Doe Fund. Our problem is, of course, our resources are limited and our talents are limited, for lack of a better term. Ed put it perfectly before. We're like, our job is to keep the streets clean, plant, make things look good, encourage business development. We never dreamed when we started our jobs that we'd be here during a pandemic when everything started to fall apart and the social structure needed to be rebuilt. And yet here we are. I think would be dependent on the people we work with on the social service side. They're the experts. We are not. So, to the extent that DHS and other agencies that can handle the health, other agencies can handle this sort of problems, can receive more funding and encouragement to do the jobs they need to do to help this situation, the better.
And I just want to also add that for us, we've seen more effectiveness when there is coordination amongst the city agencies. It's not just the outreach, you have your homeless outreach providers, but if you couple that with social workers and the NYPD and sanitation in dealing with these issues more, holistically, we have found in those circumstances, it's been more effective.
Yeah, that's a great point, Rochelle. Thank you. I do think, it all goes back to responsibilities and structure, and of course funding would be the keys that I would kind of take away from this conversation. Is we kind of have to go back to the drawing board, look at the players on the map and on the field and put together, what's the proper role for everybody here, and how do you ensure coordination across the agencies, because you only have to deal with government for about 5 minutes to know that agencies don't talk to each other unless they're forced to. So I think coordination across several agencies and outreach providers and everybody is critical here. And it's, obviously there needs to be more outreach, obviously we need more funding. But I think, communication and, the structure here of everything is just as critical in my view. So,
right. To be clear, I only asked not obviously for the bids to solve the homeless and the challenges. That's not what I was asking for. Just looking for another tool in the toolbox, along with, like you said, the coordination between the agencies. That's what's really going to help push the things forward. But there are social service programs where they are always looking for something. So it's just an ask if this would be something that we ask said social services if programs like this would make sense for the ones that do line up for that. It wasn't an ask for the bids to solve it, just looking if it's a part of the tool chest.
All right.
Thank you.
Brendan?
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly point out, since I know the committee is contemplating what sorts of asks it may want to have here, that there are multiple ways for the community board to ask for things. I know there's been some talk about, increased funding for one thing or for another thing. So, if that's the sort of thing that the committee would be interested in, then something like a budget request or budget requests might be something the committee would want to consider. For community board members who are a bit newer to that concept, each year the community board sends budget requests to the city on that certain things get funded or get funded more. So I just thought I would throw that thought in there as the committee contemplates what it might want to do.
Yeah, I think we'll definitely work with the budget committee on certain things, but I think, the severity and the urgency here also warrants some additional attention. Stuart?
It seems to me that whatever budget request we might want to make, we should merge that with the question of who the lead agency is, so that we're not just asking for money, but we're asking for money to be directed in a particular way so that it will be effective.
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue there is, responsibilities may shift across, agencies but I think in order to point the administration in the right way, I think, rather than just increasing budgets of DHS, well, what are we giving them money for? And are they not to suggest that they shouldn't get money, but just as an example, we don't know, if they're still going to be responsible for certain services that may shift, to somebody else, or might shift to a contracted outreach provider, just as an example. So I don't want to get too specific there, but I think we can highlight what the needs are, and then the city, from a point of view, can allocate that money appropriately. So that might be an easier way for us to kind of navigate this, and then we can back that up with any budget requests formally through the district needs statement and whatnot. All right, committee members, any final questions for the bids? I think we need to wrap this conversation. I think we've covered full circle. Any final questions, committee members? Members of the bids, do you have any final comments?
Just thank you for having us.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Rob. You've been great help, as have all of you, James and Rochelle and Ed.
Thanks to you also and your support always.
Yeah, absolutely. And if there's anything
Thanks,
else,
everybody.
anything we can do, feel free to reach out and we can certainly partner. And I think, coming out of this committee, we'll find out in the next, 5 minutes what action the committee wants to pursue. But I definitely think we'll be talking again throughout the year, as the budget process evolves and as the needs may change. Hopefully, by the end of this year, we'll see some progress, some major progress, and hopefully, workers will be back in the city and the economic activity will be working its way back to normal. But take it 1 month at a time here. So, committee members, from the standpoint of any resolutions, simple or complex, do we have any motions that we want to make? Anything that we want to put forth to the board for the month of February? I know, it's a small committee. I know the issues here are complex. But any thoughts so far that we want to, any issues that we want to take up? So let me ask you. So I think one of the simple ones that we can put forth will be the one I mentioned earlier about establishing a criteria for DHS police and homeless shelters, which I think covers off a lot of the feedback that the housing committee heard the other night, and we heard last week at full board, with just, shelter issues and concern overall. But I think at a minimum, there should be establishment for criteria and increased use of DHS police in shelters, just to alleviate the precinct resources being utilized in that way. That would be one item we can consider. And then just simply, increase. We talked about several funding increases, but basically, here's the problem. It's sort of, I think the other big one would be going back to the structure and landscape of everything. Any comments from the committee? All right, well, if nobody has any further comments, Ed, here's some.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate what I said at the beginning, which was at the end of the last administration, that the Commercial District Recovery Safety Plan Task Force was really useful for us in addressing hotspots. And again, this was coordinated by Chief Moynihan from the position of City Hall, bringing multiple agencies together to respond to hotspot situations in high traffic commercial locations. And so, they might do, I think the term is a sweep, but a sweep sounds like it's, like arresting people, and it wasn't like that. It would, they bring, Homeless Services, Consumer Affairs, Department of Health, multiple agencies that you would not normally be able to get at the same time because there was a single City Hall coordination effort. It shouldn't require that. Like that level of City Hall involvement on granular issues, normally we would hope that agencies would be able to be empowered to respond to the things that they need to in a routine fashion without having a City Hall level of coordination. So I'm not recommending necessarily that be restarted, but I think that what I'm hearing from my colleagues and from people on the board is that one of the big frustrations is that we seem to be back into a situation where problems get ping-ponged between different organizations. And I don't necessarily have the solution to that, but there really does need to be in some agency who takes responsibility for issues that's not just the NYPD. I think that was where we were running into the problems, was that NYPD was the agency of last resort, and their only tool was arrest, right? Or, they didn't have, the NYPD doesn't have social services, they have health services. So that's where you need these multiple agencies together, and anything that can, improve that level of coordination that responds to on the street issues. We just recently had a conversation with the new district attorney, who said that one of his goals is to, have street issues be addressed by a response team that involves multiple agencies. And that, that's one of their interesting ideas for that. And there's no 311 ticket to ask for that, right? There's things that we want that there's no way to ask for. And that would be the thing that would be, I think, really helpful from our perspective.
All right. Yeah, I tend to agree. And given that, we're not solving anything in an hour and a half meeting, I think that maybe that's the direction we need to go for, and ask for the, creation of a task force, with the key stakeholders, kind of convene in partnership with the community board, and all the respective agencies to kind of get a little more granular on some of these things. Committee members, anything you'd want to do with that? I think that's probably the direction. We're not going to solve all the problems in the resolution, but I think the increased use of task forces might be instrumental. This coordination is, I think, is one of the biggest challenges.
Oh, I'm sorry, how do we go about that? Do we invite the various agencies to a hearing, or?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few different ways we could do it, but I think, I don't know, Brendan, we've had, certain, it's basically just, convening a task. We convened task forces at the community board level before. I don't know, maybe Asia, I don't know if you've been a part of any of those. But that's certainly an opportunity I see where we, get stakeholders in a room. We meet every month. We hash out the issues, and then we come up with action plans for the following. It's something a little more granular than we can manage in committee. Brandon, do you happen to know anything on what the formal process would be?
I have to admit, I have not been involved with any sort of, formal task force before, so I would likely need to ask Jesus and see if he has anything to contribute in that realm, or any further thoughts on that.
Yep. Okay. So I mean, we can leave. I mean, if the committee wants to go in that direction, and I don't know, Ed, do you know how that was actually? It originated at City Hall. Did somebody urge that, or did City Hall come up with that on their own?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the origins, but I can tell you it's way above my pay grade. It would have been that something at the deputy mayor level would have decided that, that was necessary.
Okay. All right, committee members, other thoughts, because we really have to move along here.
I'd like to know a little bit more about the Commercial Safety Task Force. What Ed describes of it makes complete sense to help address quality of life. A lot of the issues fall because they fall between the cracks of different agencies, different groups, different services, and some of which that we're not aware of. I think I'd like to see if there's a way to source how the previous Commercial Safety Task Force functioned.
Well, yeah, I mean, I hear your question. I mean, I would say that, our needs might be, I mean, the commercial district, I know, I think the main reason that was assembled, if I'm not mistaken, was because, we needed the economic activity to resume. And there were several, crime and safety concerns, or at least the perception thereof, that was prohibiting, workers from coming back and people from partaking in economic activity. But I think our needs might be a little bit different because we have, as we all know, there's a number of homeless shelters, other social services provided in our district, which are impacting the quality of life. So I think, our needs might be slightly different. There's certainly a lot of overlap with the commercial business sector. But I think we also need to kind of steer some attention to, some of the social services that are provided here and what that means for our district. So I would say that any task force that we create might be might be slightly different in scope and complexion.
Agreed. I just never even heard of a commercial task force, let alone a task force in general that combines different agencies. So I'm kind of curious how they formed it, and like you said, added something that pertains to our community board, the neighborhoods, the residences, and see if we could take some of the framework that made the commercial task force successful.
Okay.
and bring it back to something that makes sense for a wider perspective. So, but we would only know that if we knew, I guess,
Yeah, I mean,
spoke to it before.
all right. So what we'll do is, Rob, do you have anything?
I was just going to say that it was a good model, and Stephen's points are absolutely right. It was created basically because as COVID hit, as everything shut down, the bids were really agitating City Hall to do something. And it took a while before they came up with this model. But as Ed pointed out, it worked well. But the problem was us. It was all about us. And so it was our problems. But if it happened on First Avenue where there's no bid, there wasn't going to be, unless we advocated for it, there wasn't going to be that coordinated response. And so it was very case by case. But the model has a lot of merit and continues to have a lot of merit, even though the task force is gone. But advocating for something like that the community boards could do, because you will know, I know what's happening on my blocks, but you will know what's happening on most of at least CB6's blocks. Continuing that model and taking it forward, I would think would be eminently doable by City Hall.
Yeah, don't disagree. Lou?
I was just thinking that if we're going to be dealing with a regional, if you will, a regional problem, Union Square, Grand Central, East Midtown, and so on, perhaps we ought to ask the borough president to invite everybody in and work this as a task force at the borough presidential level. There is precedent for that.
Yeah, I think that's a great segue. So committee members, so Lou, are you making a motion?
Also move.
Okay. Is there a second to call on the borough president's office to assemble the necessary stakeholders?
Second.
Or I'll second.
Okay, Stuart, and okay, I don't know who that was.
Steve.
Steve, okay. So the motion has been made and seconded. Brendan, proceed to a vote on that.
Okay. When I call your name, please say whether you are in favor, opposed, abstain, or abstain for cause. Just a moment. Matt Roberts.
In favor.
Seema is not here. Sean is not here either. Steve-O.
In favor.
Stu Desser.
In favor?
Eric Goldberg.
Oh, in favor.
Lou Sapersky.
In favor?
And Azia Badi. Azia? Okay, I'm not hearing Azia, but
Sorry,
Oh,
I
sorry.
just had to step away.
no
Sorry.
worries.
Can,
I'm sorry, I didn't get your vote.
Yes.
Okay, with 6 in favor, nobody opposed or abstaining, the resolution passes.
All right. So do we need, so Brendan, do we need a written reso, or is that just a request that can be made?
Well, it's a request to a specific agency to form something.
Okay, so I guess that would be a reso.
So there would need to be a writer of the resolution.
Okay. Do we have a volunteer?
I'll try to write the resolution. There's a lot of this I'm not familiar with. I'm working from
All right,
past experience.
All right, Lou, let's work.
I'll work with Brendan and Matt on framing out the document.
All right, we'll work together on that. Sounds good. All right. So thank you, everybody. Very good initial conversation. I'm sure we will talk again as the year progresses, but I want to thank all of you for joining us and for trying to tackle this issue. And we'll talk again soon. Thanks to the, so now I'm going to waive the chair's report and because in the interest of time, and do we have any items of old or new business? Okay. Okay, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Don't move.
All right, thank you, Lou. So thank you, everybody. Good conversation, and we'll pick it up next month. We have the district attorney's office to kind of talk about what their policies, which I believe are being revised this week. So we'll hear from them on that. So thank you all, and talk soon.
And would you get Brendan to give you my phone number and